All right, let's get right into it. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're tackling something that literally changes how business gets done globally. The 3 stages of negotiation. Now, if you're thinking successful negotiation is just, having a high-pressure argument across some massive mahogany table until the other side finally cracks, well, you're in for a massive paradigm shift today. We're breaking down a complete framework for international deal-making, and we're going to see exactly why the most absolutely crucial parts of any deal happen way before and way after anyone actually sits down to talk. Okay, let's dive into this by asking a foundational question. Where does negotiation actually happen? See, there's this common illusion out there that deals are won or lost solely by banging on a conference table or, delivering some slick movie-style pitch in the boardroom. But the reality? The actual face-to-face meeting is deeply, and I mean deeply influenced by a massive web of invisible variables. Our source material hits on a really profound truth here. In negotiation, it is the perception of reality which is more important than the reality itself. So what does this all mean? Well, this happens because of what the framework calls background factors and the overarching atmosphere. We're talking about your market position, the involvement of third parties, like governments, and the whole political and social environment. These elements are quietly operating in the background, shaping everyone's perception of reality and completely dictating power dynamics long before anyone even says hello. So, to make sense of all this, we're going to follow a highly actionable chronological roadmap today. We'll start with the negotiation illusion, then move into Stage 1, pre-negotiation, Stage 2, face-to-face, Stage 3, post-negotiation, and finally wrap up with securing a win-win outcome.
Let's kick things off with Section 1, the negotiation illusion. We really need to look closely at those underlying background variables.
And this brilliantly illustrates how the true lifespan of a deal completely shatters that boardroom illusion. You literally cannot walk into a room blind to the market structure or the alternative options available to the other side, right? Because those things dictate dependence and power. The groundwork, that takes weeks, maybe even months beforehand. Then you have the actual meeting, which might just be a few hours at the table. And finally, you have the implementation phase, which can last for years after the fact. The face-to-face meeting is merely a tiny fraction of the chronological process. If you're only focusing on the meeting, you're missing the vast majority of the whole shebang.
Which brings us right to Section 2, Stage 1, pre-negotiation. This is where we focus heavily on gathering our intel.
Now, you might be wondering what this phase looks like. Well, it isn't about conflict. It should actually be heavily dominated by cooperation and jointly defining the problem. And to show you just how seriously companies take this prep phase, get this. According to one estimate, an incredible $800 million is spent annually on industrial spying in the U.S. alone, just to prepare for negotiations and uncover competitor weaknesses. Crazy, right? But the source document makes a really important point. You absolutely do not need to use unethical methods like spying. You can gather a tremendous amount of leverage simply by reading annual accounts and talking to a firm's executives, customers, and suppliers.
So, how do we actually prepare effectively? We follow these 3 critical steps. First, identify contents. Figure out the exact interests at stake, what you stand to gain or lose, and all your motives, both tangible and intangible. Second, create alternatives. You aren't just limited to persuasion or threats or concessions here. Ask yourself, what if they don't accept this? And third, understand their position. You need to literally put yourself in the other party's shoes. Anticipating their rational reactions allows you to formulate new arguments and really build up your relative power.
Let's look at a really concrete anecdote from the source that proves the immense value of creating these alternative overlaps. Imagine a buyer suddenly demands a 5% direct price concession right at the tail end of the deal. Instead of just rolling over, giving up margin, or worse, losing the deal entirely, one incredibly skilled seller proposed an alternative, a 10% rebate on all spare parts bought over the next 3 years. And the buyer gladly accepted. A potentially deal-breaking price cut was cleverly swapped for a parts rebate that basically guaranteed future business. Brilliant.
Moving right along to Section 3, Stage 2, face-to-face. It is finally time to head into the room.
So, when you sit down, you're going to immediately encounter different strategic approaches. All that abstract groundwork we just talked about, it finally transforms into dynamic clash, cooperation, and conditional signaling. You might face a tough strategy, where the other party starts with a ridiculously high initial offer and just remains firm, expecting you to make the first concession. On the flip side is a soft strategy. This is where they make a moderate offer and concede first in the hopes you'll reciprocate. A truly successful negotiator anticipates the other side's style early on and adapts their own behavior and counteroffers accordingly.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how drastically cultural nuances alter our baseline perceptions and expectations, even down to the most basic things. Get this, in the US, an octopus is said to have 8 arms, but in Japan, it's said to have 8 legs. I mean, if we can't even agree on the anatomy of an octopus, just imagine the absolute complexity of agreeing on a multi-million-dollar infrastructure contract. And this cultural dimension extends heavily into how we speak. In Western cultures, communication is often explicit and direct, right? Yes literally means yes. But in many Asian and Arabic cultures, communication is highly indirect. An indicator like maybe or perhaps or inconvenient, that might actually mean impossible. Sometimes even yes just means maybe. Reading between the lines is absolutely vital here. Otherwise, you might mistake a polite perhaps for a guaranteed deal. Aside from culture, you've also got to manage individual behavioral types at the table. You're often going to encounter bullies who just want to threaten and push. The tactic there? Draw firm limits. Then there are the avoiders. They're terrified of making wrong decisions and constantly defer to their head office. You need to assure them, make them feel safe. And finally, there are acceptors. They'll say yes to almost everything. With them, you absolutely must pin them down on exactly how and when they're going to deliver, just to test if that yes is actually real. Handling all these variables requires a very specific temperament. As the text vividly puts it, a good negotiator must have a quick mind but unlimited patience and inspire trust without trusting others. Patience is your greatest asset here. In some markets, like Eastern Europe or China, you might face an entirely fresh negotiating team day after day. It is a grueling process deliberately designed to test you. You just cannot expect to fly in, wrap things up, and be home in a week. Once you finally get past all of that, we enter Section 4, Stage 3, Post-Negotiation, which is all about drafting the contract. I really have to subvert your expectations here. The deal is emphatically not done just because hands were shaken, smiles were exchanged, and everyone took a nice group photo. Drafting the actual contract language is a critical, entirely separate negotiation process in itself. Writing down the precise terms can take considerable time. And if meanings and values differ between the two parties, which, as we've already seen, they very often do, the act of writing the contract usually reignites the conflict all over again. A massive trap at this stage is intentional ambiguity. Sometimes, negotiators get fatigued, they're tired, so they leave certain issues vague just to speed up the signing. I strongly caution you against rushing to the finish line with ambiguous language. While it might feel like a big win today, it will inevitably reopen conflicts later on during the implementation stage. You must thoroughly summarize and test mutual understanding before leaving that table. Ask point-blank questions like, do we understand correctly that if we pay within 3 years, you reduce the price by 7%? And that naturally transitions us into our final section, Section 5, securing a win-win outcome and defining what success actually looks like. So, the crucial point is, after navigating this intense 3-stage life cycle of groundwork, meetings, and contract drafting, how do we actually define success? Well, a good outcome is an agreement that not only benefits both parties, but definitively leads to successful implementation. Success isn't about dominating your opponent or tricking them into a corner. No way. It's about crafting a functional, win-win reality that resolves mutual problems and fosters a sustainable, long-term relationship. And we need a really stark reminder right here. Sometimes, no deal is drastically better than entering into a bad deal. Amateurs try to force an impossible dream just to get a signature on a page. Professionals, they consider the real-world realities of an agreement, knowing when the terms just don't align with your objectives, and actually having the courage to walk away from a bad arrangement. That is the ultimate mark of a skilled negotiator. We've seen today that true negotiation is this dynamic cycle of intense background prep, face-to-face adaptability, and rigorous post-agreement drafting. So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. Knowing that the most critical battles are won before you even enter the room, how will you transform your preparation for your next high-stakes negotiation? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope this 3-stage framework serves you well in all your future deals.